Welcome to Card Central 365 on STL Sports Central. This show is powered by Gray Bar. All content provided by DraftKings. The crown is yours. He's Brenden Schaeffer. I'm Stefan, Caray, and it has been an awful lot of fun talking about the Cardinals of late. Back-to-back wins against the Cubs, and as I said yesterday, another disclaimer, I said the Cardinals couldn't beat the Cubs at their own game. Well, they've done it twice. Back-to-back games scoring 8 runs. They're barreling the ball out of this ballpark. They're playing excellent defense. They're running the bases extremely well. We'll cover all that and more on this show. Brenden, last night, whole hell of a lot of fun.
Unbelievable, right? I think that was the Cardinals' best win of the year when you consider all the circumstances, all the drama, the fact that it comes against your divisional rival and the one that's leading you in the standings right now. There was just about everything you could hope as a baseball fan to see from last night's game. Even better that the Cardinals come out on top with a couple of key plays becoming the difference. And I think it's a factor of when the Cubs give you an inch, you have to take a mile, and that's what the Cardinals did last night. Mason Wynn with the great base running play on Pete Crow Armstrong. It's crazy that a play like that does end up the equivalent anyway of the difference in the game as the Cardinals win at 8-7. So now you're sitting here 2.5 games out from the divisional lead, a couple of tough lefties on tap over the next 2 days, but everything's still sitting in front of the Cardinals to be able to trim this gap in the division even more. A lot of fun right now in St. Louis.
And I think it's safe to say it's easier to win 2 out of 3 than winning 3 out of 4. But now that's well within reach for the Cardinals, who just need to win one of the next 2 against the Cubs at home. We're going to touch on game 3, but I want to keep talking about this second game of the series. Cardinals held scoreless from the 5th inning on. And that bullpen did really the Lord's work in game 2. Finding a way to allow just 2 runs. The Cubs got back into the game with a Nico Hoerner 2-run home run in the 6th. But they held. They bent but didn't break. And to be able to do that, I think, is a sign for what they might be able to do in the later stretches of the season, potentially in the postseason, if they can make it that far.
Yeah, I think the bullpen job that you got out of Phil Maton yesterday really stands out in the way that he was able to, get through some very key spots for the Cardinals, recorded 4 outs for you. You had Jojo Romero, still maybe not quite up to full speed, gives up a couple of base runners, which complicated matters there for Maton. But you're getting those guys rounding the corner, I think, in terms of being back to form. We can still talk about Ryan Helsley and the concerns about the fastball and just kind of how hittable it's been for opposing batters recently. But, man, that bullpen did. They rode the rail through the final innings of the game. You can look at Steven Matz and say there is a level of concern there, I think, as well, with the home runs he's been giving up. But more positives than not, I think, from the Cardinal bullpen yesterday, where you had to find a way to hold on to that game once you were in position to win it. And they did that. And that's what the types of teams that have designs on making October are capable of doing.
Well, you look at the 7th inning, 8th inning, and 9th inning, they weren't exactly 1, 2, 3 for the Cardinals relievers. Top of the 7th, the Cubs had runners 1st and 3rd with 1 out, couldn't score. Top of the 8th, Maton did a little bit better of a job, but you did have a runner on 2nd with 1 out. Didn't happen. Didn't work out for the Cubs. Top of the 9th, yeah, we saw what happened. You had runners 2nd and 3rd with 2 outs after Pete Crow Armstrong stole second base. Dansby Swanson with a chopper to 3rd. Nolan Arenado had the wherewithal, had the presence of mind to barehand the baseball, still deliver an accurate throw with all that spin, and finds a way to help Ryan Helsley to his 15th save of the year. That might be his best play of the season, and that is a huge, huge statement considering what we've seen him do flying into the stands and all the plays that he's made at the hot corner in 2025.
There was the play that he made earlier in the game that I think would have been the greatest play any of us have ever seen if he would have been able to record the out at first. The 109-mile-per-hour liner off the bat, he's able to knock it down with a full extension and then basically dribbling it like a basketball, pick it up, and in one smooth motion throw to first. Obviously, didn't quite get enough mustard on that throw, but that was a glimpse of what was to come because the play he made in a clutch scenario in the 9th inning, that's what amazes me about some of the plays that he makes. It's when the game is on the line. When the Cardinals need it the most, he finds a way to come through. I just don't know how many third basemen on this planet are making the play that Nolan Arenado made there to seal the game. I mean, that's a walk-off defensive gem. Can't really call it a web gem because he didn't use the glove, but that's a walk-off play in the field. It doesn't get much better than that in the Cardinals-Cubs rivalry, and it was awesome to see some of the commentary from Arenado from the clubhouse last night, and just how fired up he has been to come to the ballpark this week and play in this rivalry. A guy that we didn't necessarily know he would be in this position as of 3-4 months ago, but he's still here in St. Louis. And even though the bat maybe is not as productive as we're used to seeing it from his prime years, I think the defense is as good as we have ever seen it from Nolan Arenado right now.
He certainly should be the front runner for the Gold Glove Award at third base, which would be, I believe, his 11th, correct? If he does win it this season.
Yeah.
He's been so important at that position for the Cardinals. And again, a guy that we didn't know was going to be in a Cardinals uniform if you talked about heading into the offseason this past year. To see him fired up is so good. But from one great defensive play to another, I would feel remiss if we didn't mention Alec Burleson's catch in the 7th inning. To be able to dive into the stands, into the netting, and make that catch, I'm a bit shocked that the Cubs didn't challenge the play. But for all of the questions that we've had about Alec Burleson's defensive acumen, he's made a couple of really nice plays in right field this year.
He had a nice sliding catch earlier in the game as well last night. Look, Alec Burleson puts in a lot of work on his defense. He takes pride in being somebody that they can put out there in the outfield, and he doesn't want to be a detriment to the team defensively, right? It's not that it's a natural position for him necessarily, but it's something that he's put a lot of work into. And it has to be that way because for his bat to be able to get into this version of the Cardinals lineup, he's got to probably fill out some time in the outfield. Wilson Contreras is your first baseman, especially with Ivan Herrera when he's healthy. It puts another logjam at that DH spot. And right now, Nolan Gorman is hitting really well, and you'd like to find ways to keep his bat in the lineup. So that means a lot of time in the outfield for Alec Burleson. And I think it's one of those things that maybe the Cardinals reluctantly at first, as they were ushering in an era of more playing time for Burley, we're saying, all right, we're just going to have to put him out there and kind of hold our breath. But the fact that he was a plus for you defensively last night, and maybe the Cardinals don't come away with that win without some of the contributions that he made in the field, is really impressive. And it speaks to the work that he's put in. Like I said, I know it's something that he takes pride in and can kind of end up as the butt of the joke sometimes when it doesn't seem like he is as effective out there as some others might be. But he got the last laugh last night and did it in dramatic fashion. I mean, that ball up against the netting, you're right. At first, I was waiting to see Craig Counsell go to the earmuffs and say, hey, we want to challenge this because that ball nicks the netting and they can prove it on replay before it lands in the mitt. Well, it's a foul ball. It's not actually an out to dead ball. But right there in that moment, I thought it was one of the most dramatic moments of the game, actually, Stefan, when they're showing the video camera angle of Counsell in the dugout and he goes, no. And there's your dad going, he's not going to challenge. Like that, to me, that was one of the best parts, best calls of the game from Chip Caray right there. And so that was a lot of fun. That's the dramatic nature of this rivalry, though. Just every little play like that can end up being a big difference in the end. So you're right. Credit to Burleson and credit to the Cardinals for kind of having the faith to say, hey, we're going to have to ride with him because his bat has got to stay in the lineup.
Well, not to mention the holy cow that he broke out in fashion of the great Harry Caray, who had plenty of glasses, plenty of personality, and a great career with both the Cardinals and the Cubs. There was so much discourse about whether he should have used it for that play or for Arenado's barehanded play to seal the deal. Well, you didn't know that Arenado's barehanded play was going to seal the deal, so I'll give him a pass on that. But before we get into our next point, this show, Card Central 365, is powered by Graybar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. He's Brenden Schaeffer. I'm Stefan Caray. It is a wonderful Wednesday afternoon ahead of Game 3 against the Cubbies. And the Cardinals had their great defensive work, but one play that stands out more than the rest was a defensive miscue by the Cubs. And I think that's the big difference maker is the Cardinals have been known for being one of the best defensive teams in baseball. The Cubs have been known for being one of the best offensive teams in baseball, not to suggest they don't have good defenders, but Pete Crow Armstrong, one of their more sure-handed defensive players, dropped the ball a bit in center field in that, what was it, the third inning or the fourth inning of yesterday's game when Mason Wynn came home to score on a two-base sacrifice fly.
That was crazy. I mean, that is just the model of good quality old school baseball. If you're Mason Wynn, if you're Pop Warner, I know there have been some times this season and in the past years where Pop Warner maybe gets a little bit overly aggressive with some sends, right? And people like to blame whoever they can. So a lot of times maybe the third base coach ends up falling victim to that a little bit when there's some plays at the plate that don't look quite the way you want. But I tell you what, last night was one of Pop Warner's finest moments and just shows how on the ball and locked in he was to that situation because his PCA is doing his little twirl there in center field, thinking he maybe just caught the third out of the inning. Mason Wynn is doing what he should do, tagging up from second to third. But Pop Warner is watching, and he's going, he doesn't know. And he knows who's running on second base. Mason Wynn, one of the more fleet of foot base runners that the Cardinals have. And he never hesitated. I mean, he's waving him around. Mason Wynn doesn't question it. Doesn't go, why is he sending me on this? I tell you what, out of his break from the second base bag, I think Mason Wynn has the baseball player's mentality that, like, I'm going until you tell me to stop. And so I'd love nothing more than to score on this play. He can't see what's going on behind him to know that PCA wasn't on the ball and returning it to the infield. But I just love that shot on the replay of Wynn as he's rounding third. He never breaks stride. I mean, he's thinking the whole way, I've got my coach picking me up. I know that I'm going to trust his judgment here. And it's a bang-bang play at the plate if it's a close throw. But when you're forcing the defense to make a play like that after a lackadaisical moment from a good defender, as you mentioned, PCA is normally one of the guys that you'd be talking about as a Gold Glove candidate. He's got 10 outs above average in center field. I don't know how the defensive run saved metric exactly works, Stefan, but I think you got to dock him one on that play because Mason Wynn flat out stole a run with the help of his third base coach.
And that throw into the cutoff man was sort of a looping throw. It was halfway between him trying to rip the throw into the cutoff man and a throw that you throw into the cutoff man after you think the third out's been recorded, which allowed Mason Wynn to break all the way home. You see the Cardinals on their social media after wins, after big wins especially, go into the tunnel and say, who do you think the impact player of the game was? And you'll usually hear the starting pitcher or somebody that hit a big home run. I think Pop Warner deserved a little bit more love than he got yesterday. In a one-run game, that was the deciding run. The Cardinals did not score after that point. So to be able to see that happening was great for St. Louis. It was great for the fan base. It was great for the team. And I think just continues to highlight what style of baseball they're playing in 2025.
Yeah, and a lot of the narratives coming out from this team, and I think Oliver Marmol has done a great job of this. I heard a little bit of him yesterday on the KMOX show that he joins every Tuesday, just talking about the togetherness of this group. And he flat out said, this has coalesced in a better way than they have necessarily seen in other recent iterations of the team. And that's just a positive to what this year's club is doing. But there's also this notion that, look, we're going to go through some times that it's not always going to be sunshine and roses. Look, with a young team, it's going to feel pretty good when things are riding high. But how do you look and how do you navigate the waters when you're losing 5 of 6, which is inevitably going to happen during a baseball summer? You play for 6 months, you're not going to be on full cylinders at all times. But the way the Cardinals have found ways to kind of keep that togetherness, to keep that mentality of steadiness throughout the lows and the highs, it's showing you a version of the Cardinals that allows for more of those moments like last night for them to simply take advantage of what the other team is giving them. I thought with Mason Wynn's home run, actually, we talk about his base running. He had a big game at the plate, driving in 4 of the runs and scoring 2 of them. His home run came at such a key time, though, after Michael McGreevy had given up that 5 spot. You come right there after and say, look, this game's not going to be over with my swing. It's now 5-4 instead of 5-2. And that was kind of the energizer. I think every game that's going to turn into a comeback needs one of those types of moments. And it obviously comes pretty early in this one to where the Cardinals can kind of relax a little bit and say, look, we're going to play 9 innings here. This is not going to be a game where the Cubs run away with it. That was a key moment. And I just think the Cardinals have had such a sense for those timely moments in this season where they have been able to rack up these come from behind wins.
And you see the Cardinals getting into that Cubs bullpen. You see a couple of the guys that have been struggling offensively, Gorman and Nootbaar, having a tremendous start to their series, both with multi-homer series to start at Busch Stadium. This is a team that at the beginning of the month looked completely lost. Now they're right back on track. They're 2.5 games out. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. I mean, at some point, you have to start asking the question, are they creating their own energy or are they just that good of a team and being competitive? This isn't a fluke to me. I don't think anybody could make the argument that this is not a capable baseball team, that this is a team that's just getting lucky, because they've won in so many different types of ways. Good teams win those sort of fluky games. Great teams win in 17, 18 different types of ways. And I can point to about 9 or 10 different types of ways the Cardinals have won this year.
Yeah, they found a way to do it with different styles. And there'll be some weeks where you're kind of thinking, oh man, is the pitching about to crater off? And then you get a weekend of quality, solid outings from your rotation. And look, no reliever is going to be perfect throughout 6 months. And so there are going to be ebbs and flows to those guys and trying to find a way to get the most out of them when they're not feeling 100%, and holding on for some close wins that you feel like could have been more of the blowout variety is part of it. And I feel like the Cardinals have had the knack for that. And what's been amazing throughout the first two games of this Cubs series, and I'll be curious to see if it holds up, is the power surge that we have seen. Like, that's not been a huge element of the Cardinals game. Many might be surprised to learn that Lars Nootbaar is actually the team leader in home runs with his 11th of the season that he clubbed last night. And that's not really a pace that really blows you out of the water. He's on pace for maybe 23, 24 dingers over the course of a full season. But the Cardinals are maybe getting a little bit more of that. I think Nolan Gorman hitting home runs in consecutive games makes a very interesting case for how do you approach it now that a couple of lefties are coming up for the Cubs in Matthew Boyd and Shota Imanaga over the next 2 days. You want to try to feed into what he's been able to do, but you're also trying to get your most effective lineup out there. That's something that Ollie Marmol has had to balance all season long, and I have no doubt that he'll continue to do so in an effective manner. But if the power becomes a threat for the Cardinal offense, we talk about the 9 or 10 ways that they've won games. Power is not usually one of those ways that we see most prominently displayed, but they're doing it more recently, and you're certainly not going to say no as the weather heats up and maybe some of those balls start to fly out a little bit more. That could be a weapon in the Cardinals' back pocket too.
It certainly has been to start this series. And Gorman, a 3-hit night last night. We look forward to seeing more of that from him. We'll see if he's in the lineup today against a lefty. But before we talk a little bit about Matthew Boyd, who's the starter for the Cubs, and Eric Fetty, who's the starter for the Cardinals, we have to talk about the fact that baseball season is officially underway, and it's time to step up to the plate with DraftKings Pick 6. Think of DraftKings Pick 6 as your fastball right down the middle. It's the easiest way to play for cash and take a shot at a big win. Just select 2 or more players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat. Pick 6 is available in most states, including California, Texas, Georgia, Missouri, and more. Cash in your baseball knowledge. New players get $50 in Pick 6 credits instantly on just a $5 entry. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code STL Sports. That's code STL Sports for new customers to play $5. Get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Better payouts, bigger wins. Only with Pick 6 from DraftKings, the crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, welcome back to Card Central 365. Brenden, Schaeffer, Stefan, Caray here with you. Talking a little bit about game number 3 tonight at Busch Stadium. Matthew Boyd takes the mound for the Cubs. He's been probably their most effective starter in 2025 against Eric Fetty, who's had one heck of a month of June. Before we talk about those two, though, you brought up an interesting point. Nolan Gorman hitting well. Do you leave him in against the lefties? Personally, I think that you're not quite there yet with him, but maybe with somebody else, with Alec Burleson. And the reason why I say this is among qualified players for the Cardinals, there are just 3 that are hitting above 250 against left-handed pitching. Arenado and Contreras. Take a guess at who the third is.
Is it Alec Burleson?
It is Alec Burleson. It is Alec Burleson. Kind of left you the breadcrumbs on that one.
Well, a
and
little
the
bit.
breadcrumbs can be part of Burley's breakfast, as Ace says here on our chat. This is a guy that you can't take out of the lineup at this point.
It's amazing what Alec Burleson, and look, this is not something that has been consistent over his career. I think when he first came up, he was somebody that we looked at, and I know the Cardinals looked at and said, he's not overly splitting. We can get away with it from either direction. And then you look at, especially as he declined in his productivity toward the end of 2024, he was not as productive against lefties, and that was very evident in the numbers. But when you look at them now for 2025, it's been pretty similar, hitting 289 and slugging 474. He's actually slugging a little bit more against lefties than he is against righties. 799, the OPS against left-handed pitching, 808 against the right side. So he's been pretty non-splitty this season. I expect you'll see Burley in there tonight, Stefan. It's an interesting point made about Gorman. The one that you want to probably try to fit in, like if you're taking somebody out, what's the reason, is Jordan Walker. And he's a guy that we've talked about him in the runway capacity this year, but I do think we've reached a point in the season where you're looking at who's producing for you as getting the primary bulk of the ABs. The last 2 games against the Cubs, identical lineups from Oliver Marmol. But now that you see a lefty in there, and we haven't seen Walker for a couple of days, I do look at Walker and say, that's somebody I'd like to find a way to squeeze him in tonight to maybe get him a little bit of a jump start as well. Because if you get him producing, that's just one more weapon for your ball club. And right-handed power is certainly something the Cardinals are looking for a little bit more of in the absence of Ivan Herrera. Another nugget to throw at you. I know the sample size couldn't be any smaller, but Jordan Walker, 1-for-1 with a homer against Matthew Boyd, also walking against him in another plate appearance throughout his career. So there's been a limited sample of success, and you probably want to keep him as fresh as you can. Can't take Burley out. Can't take Gorman out the way that he's hitting right now. At least I don't want to. Nootbaar, I think, is another guy that we've kind of seen go back and forth. I have a proposal. I don't know if it's something Oliver Marmol will consider, but I think for a one-time only deal, maybe tonight's a night you throw Lars Nootbaar into center field, because Victor Scott II, another lefty that has struggled against lefties. Personally, that is what I would do. And Joe Roderick would be flipping out on me if he was listening in right now, because at the beginning of the year, he insisted to me that Nootbaar was going to play a ton of center for the Cardinals. And I said, no, he's not going to start there all year. And then I kind of walked that back and said, he'll start from time to time. Tonight might be one of those time-to-time scenarios where I plug in Walker for Victor Scott, and I take my chances with Lars Nootbaar in center field defensively. Do you think that is at all plausible tonight as Oliver Marmol makes out his lineup? Because that's the only way I can think to accomplish a lot of the goals with my starting 9 that I want with regard to who I'm keeping in the batting order this day.
Yeah, typically I would say the answer is a hard no. I think that especially with Fedde on the mound, he's a pitch-to-contact player, and you want to have your best defensive infield and outfield out there. And let's face it, Victor Scott's your best defensive center fielder at this point.
By far, yeah.
Now, you have Garrett Hampson that's been added into the fold. I don't see him getting in at bat here to start, especially with Sajaci being here. What do you value more? Do you value defense or value offense? And because of the last 2 games, scoring 8 runs and driving the ball out of the ballpark, you might say, okay, we can kind of hit with these guys. We might need to stick with the offensive approach and maybe take a hit on defense. But then you think about Fedde being a very different type of pitcher than McGreevy and a very different type of pitcher than Liberatore. You need that defense. So I've certainly thought about the point of what you have to do. I think Burleson ends up being your DH. Sajaci plays second. You have maybe Donovan playing left. Then you get Wynn and Arenado at short and third, and maybe Pozo because Pages has caught back-to-back days.
Right. And then you do still leave out Gorman. So like the way that you would get them all in there is a way that as I talk through it, I'm like, Ollie ain't doing this. But it would be like Burley and left, Newton center, Walker and right. And as you hear that, you go, okay, maybe not. We probably don't see that tonight because you asked the question off the top, what do you value the most? The answer has largely been defense for Oliver Marmol over the course of his tenure. But I think with the overwhelming performance right now from a guy like Alec Burleson, from a Nolan Gorman, does it tempt you at all? Would be an interesting conversation to go with a lesser defensive outfield. I don't think it's probably a bridge too far to have that lined up from left to right with Burley, Newt, and Walker to keep Gorman then at DH. And like you said, Sajaci is a guy that has come up. We said for a long time, look, if he's going to be here, he's going to need to play. And that hasn't really been the case the last couple of days. So you very well may just see it be a standard night off for some of the lefties in this Cardinal lineup. And then maybe, depending on how tonight goes, you approach it differently for the day game tomorrow with another lefty, Shota Imanaga, on the mound. It's also curious, you mentioned Pozo. He's catching one of these next 2 games for sure. Would maybe make sense for it to be tonight and then give the day game to Pages tomorrow. But do you take more liberties with your defensive alignment in a game where Pages is still in there versus Pozo? Could be another fascination of mine. There will be some guys, I think, through all the lefties, they're going to get one of the next 2 days off. I'm very curious, though, if Burleson does. Or do they just say, look, this guy is someone we want to ride right now because of how good he has been at the plate and obviously in the field, as we talked about last night. He didn't hold you back defensively in that win 8-7 over the Cubs.
I think winning both of the first 2 games gives you an opportunity to be aggressive, not to be conservative with what you do with this lineup. And we'll know pretty quickly if they're focused on winning one of the next 2 or winning both of the next 2, depending on who they roll out there and what cards they play. If you are the Cards manager, and Ollie Marmol has done a great job executing over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, really throughout the course of this entire season. But I want to talk about the starting pitching matchup tonight. Matthew Boyd has been sensational for the Cubs. 6-3, 2.84 ERA, 34 years of age. He's never pitched better. 5 innings, 2 hits, 2 earned runs with 2 walks and 6 strikeouts. He didn't have a decision on June 20th against the Mariners, but he's allowed more than 3 earned runs just once this season. So expect it to be a low-scoring affair when he's in the game. Eric Fetty, though, on the other hand, carrying a 2.49 ERA in June across 4 starts. He's 0-2 in those 4 starts, but is pitching much better. This is a right guy, right time scenario for the Cardinals. You continue to put some of your better parts of the rotation out. We aren't going to see Sonny Gray in this series. Looks like he's going to start the opener against Cleveland. But if Fetty can get a win tonight, man, oh man, the Cardinals are in good shape.
And the more we talk about this matchup, you're right with Matthew Boyd and how good he's been. You may have to win a game tonight like it looked when you beat Paul Skeens, where it's like you may not get to the opposing starter right away. You might have to dig at him a little bit, and the 2 runs you score off him in the 6th might have to hold up. And that's going to be a big task for Eric Fetty to keep the Cardinals. If you get 6 innings, 2 runs from him, maybe you can turn it into a bullpen game and win it 3-2, something of that ilk. But that would actually lead me more inclined to go with my best defensive lineup that I can tonight. So again, I think it's fascinating. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but I am curious to see how Ollie is going to approach this. And then we did, by the way, get a good comment with Palante on the mound tomorrow is maybe when you take some liberties with your outfield because he's more of a ground ball pitcher. But nevertheless, I'm looking for the Cardinals to kind of have that approach, the approach that you take against Skeens, that you took against Tarek Skubal, that you took against Pablo Lopez, where if you can just find a way to get to these guys in the middle innings, 2nd or 3rd time through the order, and be able to play crisp defense and win a close one, that might be the recipe to this game today. Because you're right, it's difficult to imagine that you're going to put up a bunch of crooked numbers against Boyd the way that he's been pitching. He's really had a nice career resurgence in recent years, and he's going to be a tough customer. Feels like the kind of guy that the Cardinals do not match up particularly well against. And looking at some career splits, there's not a ton of action that the Cardinals have had against this pitcher that is positive, other than the homer that I mentioned by Jordan Walker. So it's going to have to be a good quality playoff type of atmosphere, I feel like, when you think about the slim margins of October baseball. Maybe that's the way the Cardinals can come away with one tonight if they can play that type of game.
Well, Boyd is 1-1 with a 2.12 ERA and 23 strikeouts in 3 appearances against the Cardinals in his career. So proof's been in the pudding for him. He's liked to face the birds on the bat. Now, the Cubs used 4 relievers yesterday: Thielbar, Flexen, Pomeranz, Presley. Flexen and Pomeranz, both sub-1 ERAs. 3 out of the 4 have sub-3 ERAs, and all 4 have sub-4 ERAs. So that's 4 of the best relievers in that bullpen for the Cubs that were used in a close losing effort for Chicago. Not going to say that their bullpen spread thin because the relievers didn't have to throw too many pitches, but you see them again today. You're probably not going to see them tomorrow if you get another tight one and force Boyd out of the game in the 5th or 6th, which we know will try to be the Cardinals' plan in terms of game number 3.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting to see. And look, I think even if Boyd gets him through 6, that's probably something you can live with. Were you able to wear him down and find the key spot in that 5th or 6th inning to at least come up with a run or 2 and give your starting pitcher and your bullpen a fighting chance down the stretch? That's going to be the way that this game potentially goes down. And I think you can live with that. Like we've talked about, Stefan, you got to win in different ways. And that might be one of the ways that the Cardinals are going to have to do it today. Last night, 8-7, the way the game unfolded, I would just be surprised if we get another version of that. And, how fresh the Cubs bullpen is going through the remainder of the series is always something to think about. But sometimes there's only so much you can do to get a starter out of the game early. If he's on his game, you're going to notice that right away. And the Cardinals are just going to have those grinding sort of at-bats. Don't roll over. Don't give him anything easy. And if you get the pitch count up through 6, I think that's something that you could take and then try to go to work in the latter innings and maybe have to win it a little bit differently than yesterday, where you mentioned they did all of their scoring early and then held on for dear life. Sometimes it might work the other way, and it just feels like a game that if the Cardinals are going to pull it off tonight, which would be pretty impressive to take 3 in a row and then have a chance at a sweep, it may have to come in that capacity.
And we have to give credit where it's due to Brant Brown. He has been such a refreshment to this group, to be able to see what he has been able to do in how he game plans and attacks teams. The Cardinals' offense has certainly been revitalized by his efforts. And we've seen a lot of early in the count swings, but that was how yesterday's game started. A lot of early in the count swings, quick and easy first inning. And then guess what? They knocked him out of the game after 4. So, first time through the order might be a little slow developing. Second time through the order, they really start to lock in. And I think Boyd is one of those players where you can't give him any more leeway than he's already going to give himself. So be sure to take a couple of pitches on the corners and see what he has. And that second time through the order, hopefully you're within striking range.
And something else that maybe doesn't get talked about a ton, it's been good to see and hear the way that the Cardinals are approaching that transition from we've faced a guy once, we're talking as we get back to the dugout, we're really working to figure out what's this pitcher trying to do to us. The lefties in the lineup are talking to one another, and the way that they're spaced out, usually batting leadoff, batting third, batting fifth, batting seventh, like they've been able to have a pretty good rhythm in discussing things with one another. That was a big factor in Monday's win over Ben Brown, where all four of those lefties hit 2-run homers and are all approached a little bit differently. They are all hitting different pitches out of the ballpark, but they're able to have those conversations that I think can evolve. And that's where the Cardinals have been pretty effective recently. That second time through the order, seeing a guy once and then being able to make an adjustment as he wears down a little bit physically, but as you tune in a little bit more to what he's trying to do to you, has been a pretty impressive factor. Like I said, I don't know if that's going to transfer over when you're facing a lefty, but that's got to be the goal tonight with whatever the lineup ends up looking like.
Well, let's hope it works out that way for the Cardinals as it has in games 1 and 2. The Cardinals look to win the series outright against the Cubs in game number 3 at Busch Stadium. For everyone here at STL Sports Central, this has been Card Central 365. Brenden, Schaeffer, before we send it off, you have any final thoughts?
Final thoughts are, and it's something that we didn't touch on a ton, Garrett Hampson does come in for Jose Barrero, and I see some commenters mentioning, I kind of would prefer Michael Ciani there. I think the Cardinals are really trying to force feed getting some additional right-handed presence. Now, right now, the bench is pretty right-handed heavy, but everybody's kind of got their role where Pozo is serving mostly as just the backup catcher because there is no Herrera right now. So JC, your utility guy, but they're really looking for somebody that can stick as that utility man off the bench who doesn't need to play a ton because at full strength, Sajayce's probably still in AAA. He's not somebody that you're looking to have ride pine, but there's just a lack of viable right-handed bench options in the organization. And so I don't have a problem with picking up Garrett Hampson. It is possible he gets into center field in one of these next 2 games just because the Cardinals are on a trial basis trying to figure out what they can find from that role. I don't think you were getting much out of Barrero, and so I'm not trying to make more of it than what it is, but I will be curious to see if and when Hampson gets involved, how he acclimates himself to this Cardinals team, and maybe whether he can stick in that 26-man type of role. For the Cardinals, there are worse things to be than that. We'll see if that's something that materializes in the days ahead.
Well, he came highly recommended by the Cardinals staff from his time in Miami. He has filled that utility role very well for a number of years in his major league career. Thank you so much, Brenden, for all your coverage. Look forward to the post-game show, hopefully after a Cardinals win. We're signing off here on STL Sports Central. All content provided by DraftKings. The crown is yours. This show brought to you by Gray Bar, and we'll see you later tonight as the Cardinals try to take Game 3.